Good afternoon, everyone. The Labor Committee is called to order. It is good to be back. Nice to see everybody here. As everyone knows, we have a power sharing agreement in the Senate now. And for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be having co-chairs. So it is my honor today to open up our committee hearing, and then I'm going to pass it over to my co-chair, Dornick, who will then chair the second part of our meeting today. I'd like to begin today's meeting by just going through the committee. We also have a couple of a new member here joining us today, so we're going to do introductions and a couple of new members and new old members, I should say, of the Labor Committee. And so we'll go across if we can and introduce everyone. If you would, perhaps your name and the district that you represent, and for staff, the position that you hold, the work that you do. And we'd also like to, when we get down here, I'll start down at this end, but when we get down here, also I'd ask our researchers and our Senate pages and the staff to come up also and introduce yourselves, if you would. All right, if you would begin, Senator Umer-Verbaeten.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claire Umer-Verbaeten. I represent District 66, which includes parts of St. Paul, Roseville, Falcon Heights, and Lauderdale.
Madam Chair, Eric Pratt, I represent the best district in the state, which is Senate District 54, Scott County. So the communities of Prior Lake, Shakopee, Jordan, you might know it better as Canterbury, Mystic, and Valley Fair.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Sandy Pappas. I'm also a St. Paul legislator. I represent the capital, downtown, and neighborhoods to the north, south, and west.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Glenn Gruenhagen, District Area SD 17, which would be southwest of the metro area. It'd be McLeod, Sibley, a little bit of Carver, some of Meeker, and a little bit of Wright counties, and nice rural small communities, small businesses. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Greg Marcus. I'm a staff person with Senator Dornick.
Hello, Gene Dornick, Senate District 23, which is southeastern Minnesota. I'll just say Austin, Elberly communities.
Madam Chair, Megan Bursch, Nonpartisan Fiscal Analyst.
Hi, I'm Carlin Doyle-Fontaine. I am Senate Counsel, Nonpartisan Senate Counsel. Thank you.
I'm Jennifer McEwen, State Senator representing Duluth.
I'm Fabian Bean, the Committee Administrator.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Barks. I'm the CLA for the Labor Committee, new to Senator McEwen's office, and really excited to help out. Thank you.
Senator Grant Hochschild, District 3, the largest, most rural, and most beautiful district in the state of Minnesota. I get the chance to represent the Boundary Waters, the North Shore, half the Iron Range, 65% of the Canadian border in Minnesota, and the communities of Hermantown, Proctor, and Rice Lake. Very proud to be here as the Vice Chair of the Labor Committee.
Jason Rarick, I represent Senate District 11. That's all of Pine and Carleton counties, half of Kennebec, and little bits of Chisago and St. Louis.
John Marty, District 40, which is 6 northeast metro suburbs.
It's Rob Kupek, Senate District 4, which is most of Clay County and a good chunk of Becker County. More head over to Detroit Lakes.
Senator Nathan Wiesenberg, I represent Senate District 10. That's central Minnesota between St. Cloud and Brainerd area and 7 different counties. Thank you.
And if we could have our Senate researchers and the Senate pages please come and join us just for a quick introduction so we can put faces to names and make sure we get to meet everyone. Thank you.
Dave Frazier, Senate Republican researcher.
Danny Gillis, Senate DFL researcher for the Labor Committee.
Perrin King, one of the 3 committee pages here.
William Battle, just another one of the committee pages.
Yeah, Elizabeth Rosemark, the 3rd of the 3 committee pages.
Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate getting started again this session with all of you and look forward to the work that we'll do together. Next, we're going to do a brief jurisdiction overview with our Senate Counsel and our fiscal analyst. And then after that, we'll move to a Department of Labor and Industry overview. And then we'll switch over to the chair as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So all of the members should have a one-page document that's titled Labor, and that has the jurisdictional information for this committee. The entire Senate committee jurisdiction document is posted on the Senate website on the committee page, and it's called 2025-2026 Senate Committee Jurisdiction. I want to point out first that there are no changes to this jurisdiction list from the last biennium, but I know there's some new members and some returning members, so we do want to go through this first of all. I also like to always mention that the jurisdiction list is an art and not a science, so this is not completely comprehensive of every topic that could come to this committee as original jurisdiction, but it's kind of a living document that sometimes changes from time to time depending on committee structure and that type of thing. First, at the top, there's just a little sentence on the jurisdiction. Here, some topics that are included are fair labor standards, minimum wage, workers' compensation, and occupational safety and health. Again, it's much broader than that, but that's what we're provided at the top. The main state agencies, I'd say the main state agency is the Department of Labor and Industry. They're the largest with the largest budget and the largest compendium of laws that is within this jurisdiction. Then we also have the Bureau of Mediation Services. We'll get down to the budget jurisdiction later on, but this also contains the Public Employees Relations Board, the PERB, and the Work Comp Court of Appeals. So some other offices that are under this jurisdiction of this Labor Committee are the Access Review Board. They consider waivers from some of the state building code for accessibility. Then there's also the Apprenticeship Advisory Board, the Board of Electricity, Board of High Pressure Piping Systems, the Interstate Industrialized Modular Buildings Commission, the Occupational Safety and Health Review Board, and the Plumbing Board. Some related groups, and many of these fall under the Department of Labor and Industry with oversight by the Commissioner of Labor and Industry. So there's the Combative Sports Advisory Council, so MMA and martial arts and other boxing and those types of activities, licensing and fees. There's the Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Council, as I mentioned, there's the Council on Workers' Compensation and the Workers' Compensation Court of Appeals. There are a number of confirmations that will come through this committee. So these individuals will come before your committee where you'll get information about the individuals that have been appointed. And then you will either recommend to confirm or not to confirm. And I believe there'll be some coming sooner than later before this committee. So the Commissioner of Labor and Industry is at the top. And then we also have the Commissioner of Mediation Services. There's the Board of Electricity, High Pressure Piping Systems, the Plumbing Board, and the Work Comp Court of Appeals. I can't remember which ones will be coming here, but I think maybe the Plumbing Board, that maybe have a more immediate need for them to be confirmed. I think it's been a while since they've been confirmed. So then with budget jurisdiction, I will quickly go over that at a later date. I'm sure Ms. Bursch will go over the spreadsheet and all of that as you put together your budget. But there's the Department of Labor and Industry budget, the Bureau of Mediation Services, the PERB, and the Work Comp Court of Appeals. And then sort of in the other issues bucket, some random topics such as amusement rides, construction code, which is actually a very large issue, elevator regulation. It does list employment leaves, but I want to point out that this does not include paid leave, which falls under the jobs jurisdiction. This would be, for example, earned sick and safe time does fall under labor and industry, and I think a lot of people get confused whether or not paid leave is, who kind of runs that program and its deed. Minimum wage and then pipe fitters. So the list is not comprehensive, but when you get questions, you kind of add them to the list. So that is the jurisdiction list. If anyone has questions about it, please let me know. And that concludes my overview.
Thank you very much. And did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay. Okay, great. That concludes the jurisdictional overview. And with that, I will turn this over to my co-chair, Co-Chair Dornick.
Well, thank you, Senator McEwen. The next, we're going to do the Department of Labor and Industry overview. So we'd like to welcome Commissioner Nicole Bleesenbach and Mr. Moore to the table. Appreciate you coming. It's always good. Been great to work with you these last couple of years, and look forward to your overview. If you want to just introduce yourself and get started when you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Chair Dornick. My name is Nicole Bleesenbach, and I serve as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. It is great to be back with all of you, not only because it's great to see you, but I'm happy my car started. So I'm very happy to be here today and love the opportunity to give an overview of the department. And I can let Josiah introduce himself.
Thank you. I'm Josiah Moore. I'm the Legislative Director at the Department of Labor and Industry. Good to be here with you all today. Just going to pull up another version of this so we can get in full screen mode.
Okay. I can begin by just, while Josiah is pulling up the PowerPoint, by just referencing that in your packets should be in a two-pager that provides a very short agency overview of the different divisions within the department. It is a great reference, and if that's, it provides what you need to know to provide like a very high-level overview of the department. But we will go into each different division and each different area of our jurisdiction in more depth. This year, we've attempted to make the presentation a little more exciting by including some practical examples of the work that we're doing on the ground. So hopefully I won't have too many people falling asleep. So we can go ahead and get started on the next slide. All right, so this is just on one slide, an overview of all the work we do. The Department of Labor and Industry's mission is to ensure Minnesota's work and living environments are equitable, healthy, and safe. And our vision for achieving this mission is to be a trusted resource and impartial regulator for employers, employees, property owners, and other stakeholders. And the list on the screen is all of the operating areas, which I will be going into in more depth. Next slide. So this slide provides an overview of the source of the appropriations to the Department of Labor and Industry by fund. So as you can see from this pie chart, the Workers' Compensation Fund is the largest source of funding for the agency. And this fund is funded through assessments on insurers and self-insurers that are active in Minnesota. The Construction Codes Fund is revenue from licenses, permits, inspections, all for work performed by the agency, and that is the second largest area of funding for the department. And then the other thing I will call out on this slide is, as you can see, the general fund constitutes a pretty small fraction of the funding we receive at the department. It's about 6% of the overall revenue, or of the overall funding that we receive. Other areas are federal funds, the Contractor Recovery Fund, and workforce development. Next slide. So this slide just shows a little bit more of a breakout of how those funds are allocated to the different divisions. As you can see, the construction codes and licensing is the largest area. It is also our largest division within the department, and it constitutes the highest number of employees. One thing I will point out on this slide is kind of the break between the workers' compensation benefits portion of our revenue, or of our funding, and the workers' compensation administration. And this is to really show that while one of the largest chunks of funding for the agency is that work comp fund, much of it goes towards benefits that go directly to injured workers or in the form of reimbursements to insurers and self-insurers. The reason we have such a large source of benefits specifically for injured workers is through the Special Compensation Fund, which you'll hear more about in a little bit, but that Special Compensation Fund is the fund that goes in and covers the medical expenses and wage loss benefits for workers who are injured on the job, but whose employer failed to maintain workers' compensation insurance. So that is a large source of the agency funding that goes out. All right, next slide. So now we'll jump into the different divisions that are housed within the Department of Labor and Industry. The first I'll talk about is the Workers' Compensation Division. This division helps employees who are injured on the job to receive proper medical treatment and benefits payments in a timely manner. It mediates disputes about injuries and benefits, issues penalties for late benefit payments to injured employees, and reviews records to ensure state laws are followed. So as I mentioned, I'm going to try to give a little bit more of the practical work that the department does. So on the next slide, you'll see a highlight that comes out of the vocational rehabilitation unit within the work comp division. So the VRU unit provides return to work assistance for injured workers. And this is just one example of the type of work they do. They provided assistance for an injured worker who lived in Greater Minnesota, who was limited to driving within a 10-mile radius due to a severe concussion that she received at work. She worked with our qualified rehabilitation consultant, who provided medical management services, vocational counseling, and a referral to a placement team. The placement team provided job-seeking skills and supported her in a job search along with that QRC. VRU staff also coached on how to request accommodations in jobs that she was seeking. And numerous barriers were successfully addressed, and the injured worker returned to work as a paraprofessional in a local school district that were able to accommodate her. So this is an example of a success story. And when VRU helps injured workers restore their income, it also reduces the risk to insurers and the employer to avoid what could be a more costly claim in the end. Next slide. We're going to provide two more highlights out of work comp. So this highlight is really focusing on our compliance. CRT is the compliance records and training unit. And in the spring of 2024, the compliance unit identified some self-insurers and claim administrators that had an unusually high number of prohibited practice penalties. These are the most egregious type of penalties that we see in the work comp area. The compliance team developed individualized training to specifically address the problems they were seeing with these select self-insured employers and the claim administrators, and provided that training 3 hours over 2 days. And following that training, they saw a significant drop in the penalties and the violations that they were seeing from these identified self-insured employers and claim administrators. So this is the type of work when they're able to dig in and can identify patterns across the community or the stakeholders that they work with, how they can make a difference in providing that individualized training. And then finally, I want to highlight something that came out of the Special Compensation Fund unit. So in this case, an employee sustained a serious injury involving a meat grinder that resulted in the amputation of a hand. The employer did not have an active workers' compensation policy at the time of the injury. So the employee filed a claim with the Special Compensation Fund at DLI, which is the purpose of the fund is there to help provide coverage for injured workers when their employer fails to maintain that coverage. The employee received wage loss benefits, medical management, and return to work assistance that they had because of the Special Compensation Fund. The Special Compensation Fund then, in those circumstances, pursues reimbursement from the uninsured employer of the benefit and settlement costs. So another highlight of some of the specific work that we do. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about with regard to the workers' compensation activities of the department is the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council. This council, I think, is unique among many of the councils that we have in state government, but they recommend legislation pertaining to workers' compensation and advise the department in carrying out the purposes of Chapter 176. So there are 6 representatives, each from business and organized labor, that make up the Work Comp Advisory Council. The 4 legislative caucuses and the governor each appoint 1 labor and 1 business representative, and then the heads of the state's largest labor group, the Minnesota AFL-CIO, and the state's largest business group, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, are permanent members on the council. DLI provides administrative support, and I serve as the non-voting chair of the council. By law, the way the council is set up, it requires a near consensus of members, so it has to have the support of a majority of the business council members and the majority of the labor delegations on the council in order to send a Work Comp Advisory Council bill through. So the purpose of the informal agreement that was reached in 1995 was to place the responsibility for resolving differences about workers' compensation law in the hands of those who are most affected by statutory changes, so employers and the employees who may be injured at work. Generally meets the 2nd Wednesday of the month. That is subject to change, but we are always happy to have attendees, so feel free to come by. All right, turning to our Construction Codes and Licensing Division. The Construction Codes and Licensing Division develops and enforces construction-related health and safety codes for the construction of buildings. The division also licenses boiler operators, electricians, electrical and technology system contractors, elevator constructors, high-pressure piping pipe fitters, manufactured home installers, plumbers, plumbing contractors, power limited technicians, residential building contractors, remodelers, and roofers. The division also certifies building officials. So really the division works to protect the public through education, inspection, plan review, licensing, enforcement, and then also want to highlight the Contractor Recovery Fund, which is a fund that exists to help make homeowners whole when they are defrauded by licensed building contractors. Next slide. There we go. So this is a highlight of our Construction Codes and Licensing Division on a change that we've made recently. So one function of the division is to proctor licensing exams for licensed building and construction trades. To efficiently serve stakeholders, the licensing unit now has 2 exam proctors assigned to cover the northern and southern portions of the state. So in addition to the designated exam proctor who coordinates exams at the Department of Labor and Industry's St. Paul office. This represents an exam staffing structure change from previous years when we had 1 exam proctor travel throughout the state with a limited amount of time and involves significant amount of travel. So due to this change, we now are offering exams regularly during times of high demand in numerous municipalities such as Detroit Lakes, Moorhead, Duluth, St. Cloud, Bemidji, Virginia, Rochester, Mankato, Wilmer, Marshall, and Winona. And in 2024, the Construction Codes and Licensing Division licensing unit proctored 9,754 exams with approximately 6,300 of those being completed at the DLI office in St. Paul, and about almost 3,500 proctored at non-metro locations. So excited to be able to go out and provide more access to our stakeholders around the state. All right, moving on to our Labor Standards Division. Our Labor Standards Division ensures that workers are paid correctly and that workplace rights and responsibilities are enforced for all workers. The division also educates employers and employees about their rights under Minnesota law. The areas that fall under the jurisdiction of our Labor Standards Division include child labor laws, earned sick and safe time, misclassification, overtime, minimum wage, prevailing wage, wage theft, and the provisions of the Women's Economic Security Act. I do want to highlight just some of the numbers from the last calendar year 2024. The Labor Standards Division at the department collected $2.25 million in unpaid wages and liquidated damages. That is the amount we've collected. The amount we actually assessed in calendar year 2024 is about $5.5 million. So some of those cases we were unable to collect due to bankruptcy proceedings or the employer not paying. Some are still in process at the Office of Administrative Hearings, and we're still working our way through that. But the $2.25 million that we've collected is just a fraction of what we've actually assessed and determined are owed to workers. We've also collected over $2 million in civil penalties. And we've responded to more than 23,000 inquiries and questions from stakeholders. On the next slide, you'll see some highlights. These are clips from media for some actions that the Labor Standards Division has taken and have received some press. So we are working, of course, to make Minnesota the best state for children and families. And one of the ways we support this is by taking enforcement action to protect the rights of Minnesotans in the workplace. So we've taken these are just some highlights of some of the actions we've taken in the last year. So just highlighting the Bushel Boy case, that is a case where we determined that the employer was not paying their employees overtime wages, even though the employees consistently worked more than 48 hours in a week. And so we were able to recover $200,000 in unpaid overtime wages for those employees. Similarly, recently, we found that Sanford cut an employee's hours due to pregnancy and fired her after she requested 12 weeks of parental leave under state law. The health system agreed to provide training statewide to all of their employees on what is required. So that's another example. We also have our Grape Tree Medical staffing case where the employer agreed to pay $336,000 to workers after we determined that workers were underpaid approximately that much and this was a situation where the employer was charging employees fees for missed or canceled shifts, and under state law, that is not an appropriate deduction from wages that they have earned. So they paid that $336,000 in back wages and liquidated damages to just under 1,000 employees who were impacted. And then the final action that is highlighted on the screen is a child labor case involving Smithfield Foods. And in that case, we identified at least 11 minor children between the ages of 14 and 17 who were working and in violation of state child labor laws. Smithfield we did resolve the case in a consent order, and Smithfield agreed to pay $2 million in penalties for those actions. So these are just a little bit of the little slice of the work that our Labor Standards Unit does throughout the state, and hopefully a little bit better practical understanding. Okay, Next, we will jump into the Nursing Home Workforce Standards Board. This board is under the purview of the Department of Labor and Industry. It was created in law during the 2023 legislative session to conduct investigations into working conditions in the nursing home industry and adopt rules establishing minimum employment standards that were reasonably necessary and appropriate to protect the health and welfare of nursing home workers. There are 9 members to the board, 3 commissioners or designees, so the Department of Labor and Industry, Department of Health, and the Department of Human Services are all represented on the board. Then there are 3 members representing employers and 3 members representing employees. The board has been meeting over the past 18 months to carry out the duties of the board as prescribed in statute. The next slide identifies the 2 rules that were adopted by the Nursing Home Workforce Standards Board. The first is a wage standard rule, and that is a rule that is not in effect yet, and the earliest it could go into effect is January 1 of 2026. It is dependent upon funding from the legislature. The second rule adopted was a holiday pay and certified worker organization rule. That rule has gone into effect on January 1 of 2025. All right, next we're jumping into OSHA, and we'll start with our OSHA consultation. OSHA at the department is in 2 different units. We have OSHA consultation and OSHA compliance. So OSHA Workplace Safety Consultation provides a wide variety of free services, including on-site consultation, training, and education and outreach in general industry and construction settings. Services are provided by safety and health experts who are highly qualified occupational safety and health professionals. It's essentially the consultation arm of Minnesota OSHA, yet its services are completely separate from Minnesota OSHA compliance. So no fines or penalties are issued for the work that the consultants do, as long as the employer agrees to correct all serious hazards that are identified by the workplace safety consultant. One of the highlight I wanted to bring forward under the OSHA consultation purview is our programs that help to have employers go above and beyond safety regulations. So we have a MinSharp program as well as a MinStar program. The MinSharp is administered by the consultation and recognizes companies whose management and employees work together to develop safety and health programs that go beyond basic compliance with the applicable OSHA standards, and that also have injury and illness rates below the national industry average. The program is designed for small employers, so that's fewer than 250 employees in the worksite and fewer than 500 employees nationwide. So they work with consultation to achieve success in the safety and health of their employees. Then those employers that participate can work towards MinStar status, which is the highest workplace safety and health recognition that we have in the state. And one of the employers that I wanted to highlight is Melco Tools out of Annandale, Minnesota. I was just up at Melco Tools. I think there's a picture of us there. To celebrate their move from MinSharp into MinStar, which is a really great accomplishment. And they achieved MinStar status in May of 2024. So it was great to be there with them. All right, next turning to Minnesota Occupational Safety and Health Act and standards that assure safe and healthful working conditions for Minnesota workers. They do this through helping employers comply with safety and health regulations, conducting worksite inspections and investigations, and providing technical assistance, training, and outreach. The goal that we like to talk about for Minnesota OSHA compliance is for every worker who goes to work, at the end of that shift, at the end of the workday, they go home in the same way they came to work. So that's really the ultimate goal in what Minnesota OSHA compliance does. Some highlights over the last federal fiscal year. Minnesota OSHA compliance visited over 1,000 establishments, identifying over 2,000 safety and health hazards. Generated safety inspection results within 43 days, and that is below the national average of 56 days. Generated health inspection results within 54 days, which is below, again, the national average of 68 days. Conducted over 80 outreach presentations that involved more than 3,000 participants, and responded to approximately 3,000 phone calls and 2,000 written requests for assistance. So that's kind of a highlight of the work that Minnesota OSHA does. I did want to talk a little bit about an OSHA citation issued recently to a commercial diving operation for violating the commercial diving standards. The reason I want to bring this up is because there were 2 fatalities in this industry over the past few years. And there's been a lot of attention that OSHA has brought by reaching out to these types of establishments, but also the parents of the 2 young men who were impacted by the failure of these employers to follow OSHA standards, have been very active and then have been talking about their experiences. And their work in raising awareness has really been inspiring in light of the unimaginable loss that they have endured. And I know that they have been reaching out to members of the legislature, so it's done in response to those workplace fatalities. Minnesota OSHA compliance does have a responsibility to respond to every workplace fatality as well as serious injuries around the state. All right, moving into Apprenticeship Minnesota. So Apprenticeship Minnesota is the state's apprenticeship authority under the Minnesota Apprenticeship Act and is also recognized by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship. So what Apprenticeship Minnesota does is promote and facilitate the development of quality registered apprenticeship programs that help employers recruit, train, and retain a highly skilled and diverse workforce in Minnesota. Our staff in the apprenticeship division conduct compliance reviews to ensure protection and advancement of apprentices that are training in registered apprenticeship programs. And they work to ensure opportunities through apprenticeship for underrepresented Minnesotans, including women, people of color, Indigenous people, veterans, and people with disabilities. Just to look into the numbers that we have about 11,000 active apprentices training in Minnesota currently. And in the calendar year 2024, we saw almost 2,000 apprenticeship completions. And currently registered in Minnesota, we have 214 programs. So pretty big impact that we see in this type of workforce development. One thing I wanted to highlight is it's common when people think of apprenticeship programs that they think of the building and construction trades industries. But we have been seeing more and more apprenticeship programs being registered in what we refer to as emerging industries. One that I wanted to highlight here is teacher apprenticeships. So early childhood education apprenticeship program was started in Minnesota in August 2023. That kind of, I think, got people thinking more about where we can build the apprenticeship model. And 3 teacher registered apprenticeship programs were started and registered in August of 2024. You can see a clip from, I believe it was a Star Tribune article about the apprenticeship programs that we have in Minneapolis, Owatonna, and North Branch school districts that are supporting 25 student teachers currently. So 84% of school districts report being impacted by teacher shortage, and we're hopeful that registered apprenticeship can help make an impact on that. All right, our youth skills training program supports the development of partnerships between schools and employers to provide students who are 16 and older, so primarily 16 and 17-year-olds, with classroom instruction, safety training, and paid work experience in high-growth, high-demand occupations. We do have grant money available for partnerships to create and implement youth skills training programs throughout the state. These locally developed programs are approved, supported, and monitored by the department. Just wanted to highlight, grant applications are currently open, and the current round will close on February 7th, 2025. Some of the highlights I wanted to provide as to who has received or who has been a grant recipient. In rounds 1 and 4, we've seen grants go to the Hutchinson Public Schools, the Southwest Metro Intermediate School District 288, as well as Independent School District 912, which is Malacca Public Schools, and a recent grant round, we've seen Hermantown Community Schools and Moorhead Public Schools. I'm trying to hit as many of you as possible in talking about some of our grant recipients, but we have a full list of grant recipients on our website, and it covers far more than even what I've highlighted here. All right, moving on to our dual training pipeline program. So this is a program that supports employers in building their own dual training programs that combine related instruction with on-the-job training to develop a skilled workforce. So the targets for the dual training pipeline program are high-growth industry sectors, so that includes advanced manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare services, and information technology. And what the dual training pipeline program does is brings together leaders from industry to identify occupational competencies for in-demand careers. So we partner on this program with the Office of Higher Education. They run the grant for it, and then we work with the employers who are recipients of those grants to make sure that they're developing these careers and working with them to support the employees that are working or that are traveling through the pipeline program. Some of the highlights there: Pike Lake Dental in Hermantown, American Crystal Sugar in Moorhead, and Lake County Ambulance Services in Two Harbors. Okay, we're getting to the end, so hopefully I haven't lost anyone. Next, we have our Office of Combative Sports. This office ensures that Minnesota's combative sporting events are conducted in a manner that minimizes injuries and ensures fair competition. We regulate professional boxing and professional and amateur mixed martial arts. And we also have some new coverage, as well as we also are in charge of licensing combatants, coroners, officials, promoters, and ringside physicians. In calendar year 2024, we had 56 regulated combative sports events and 392 individuals that were licensed by the Office of Combative Sports. And I think that brings me to the end. So thank you for sticking with me, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Members, questions? Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Blissenbach, so I was looking at the beginning, and that's partly why I was asking a few finance questions to one of our finance chairs here. A couple of questions about, so I noticed the workers' compensation makes up about 52% of the source of funds, but then when I look on the next page and looking at your base budget, workers' comp only makes up less than about 26%, give or take. Can you explain the differences there?
Yes, I absolutely can. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Go ahead.
I need to get back into the practice of being here. It's been a while. So yes, I can explain that. So the funding that the department receives from the Workers' Compensation Fund funds more than just the Workers' Compensation Division. So the Workers' Compensation Fund, for instance, also funds OSHA compliance. So that is the reasoning why the percentages that you see on slide 3 may not match up with where the funding actually goes in slide 4. Slide 4 is there to give a representation of which divisions within the department, what they are receiving and what that money goes towards.
Senator Liskey, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Commissioner Blissenbach, again, I'm looking at the numbers and it just doesn't seem to add up. So I don't know, because I see OSHA compliance, both compliance and consultation adds up to roughly another 12%. So that's still going to only put us well under the 52%. So I guess, can you help me out on figuring out where those other funds might be going and how they work, just for clarity on my end?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair and member, I may have to get back to you on that, but I do know that there is a portion of general support that is funded through the work comp fund, the entire workers' compensation division, as well as OSHA compliance. I can get the breakdown of that. These were prepared by a financial services unit within the department, so I'd be surprised if I think there's an explanation for that. But there is part of the work comp fund that also goes towards general support, so that might be the extra percentage.
Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Blissenbach. That does help out. I like to see the numbers and understand it. And, if somebody's watching at home, I guarantee you they're looking at this going, wait a minute, that doesn't all add up. So where's our hard-earned money that goes into the work comp? Where's that going? So
absolutely,
just looking forward to that.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple, but one kind of following up on this, Commissioner. I was going to be asking something very similar as far as with the work comp funds. Are they able to be used in other areas, which you talked about OSHA compliance? Is that the only other area that the work comp funds go to? I know you brought up the special compensation fund that uses that as well, but then a follow-up, what about the construction codes? Is that money used in other areas other than just the construction codes area of your department?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair and Senator Rarick, so the work comp fund, I believe, and I may need to phone a friend here. The work comp fund is used for workers' compensation division, which includes a special comp fund, OSHA compliance, and OSHA compliance is actually funded by a couple of different areas. It's funded by the work comp fund. It also receives federal funding, but then also part of general support. All of the money that we have out of the work comp fund is appropriated by the legislature. So what we are able to use, it's not just a fund that we have that we can decide what to use it for. It is appropriated to the different divisions. So what's used by OSHA compliance has been appropriated to for that purpose. And you asked about the construction codes and licensing fund. I believe that the only thing that construction codes and licensing fund funds is the work of the construction codes and licensing department. You're going to hear more about that because it's one of our budget items this year. But the fund is paid for by fees that are charged, which you are very well aware of. But then it does fund the work of the construction codes and licensing unit or division at the department.
Senator Rarick, follow-up.
Good on that one, but another question that I have. I see a list of all the employees you have in the different divisions. Question that I get asked a lot is, how many of your employees are back into the office as compared to how many are working remotely? Are you in some days, out some days, or a number of them now back to the office every day? Can you help us understand, where your office is at with being back into their offices?
Commissioner, go ahead.
Great. Mr. Chair, Senator Rarick, that is a very complex question to answer for the department because I don't think there was ever a point when all of our employees primarily worked out of an office. Many of our employees are out in the field doing inspections, whether it's a construction codes and licensing inspection, an OSHA inspection, or a labor standards on-site visit. But we also have a number of employees around the state that fall under our remote work policy that the state has had, and that was a policy that preceded COVID, for instance, where employees, in order to put them in a geographical region where we may not have an office, were able to list their home as their primary office. These are employees that spend about 90% of their time out inspecting buildings. So electrical inspectors, building inspectors, things like that. And then we also have employees who do have a telework arrangement, which allows them to be in the office certain days, but also to work from home. Numbers are hard on a lot of this because when people are out in the field, we know that an individual is out in the field, but there isn't a large tracking sheet. The main purpose of all of our policies, whether it's the remote work policy, the telework policy, is to ensure that we are meeting the needs of stakeholders. And that is the number one priority we have at the department, is making sure that we can provide the services we're providing, and we can do it in the most effective and efficient manner, whether that is out in the field, whether that is in the building, at one of our over 20-plus boards and councils that meet at our building, or there to conduct licensure exams. But it's a mixed bag, I guess, is the long and the short of it.
Senator Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So great segue to my next question. One of the areas that I get the most feedback from constituents is around plumbing plan reviews, and wondering where you're at right now, how long that is taking to get those out the door, and why we have not been able to catch up on that.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Chair Dornick, Senator Rarick, thank you for that question. And I will say you'll probably be hearing more about this because, like I mentioned earlier, we do have a budget item related to some of our fees in the Construction Codes and Licensing Division in order to give us the resources we need to maintain the assistance that or the services that we are providing to our constituents in that area. The plumbing plan review area of the Construction Codes and Licensing Division did have some significant delays. In response to that, we did add more employees for to the plan review unit, and we have been able to kind of cut down on the delays that we are seeing. It's still not where we want it to be, so that is an area that we are putting focused attention on so that we can get those plans reviewed and out the door quickly. We've also kind of engaged in some information campaign as well to make sure that when plans are submitted, that they're fully submitted and they're submitted in a complete way that doesn't require corrections, which adds to the timing it takes to get the plans reviewed. But we acknowledge that that was an issue, and we've made some good headway, and there's a little bit more to go.
Senator
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was hearing it was about 12 to 14 weeks out. Can you tell us where about a contractor could expect that to be today?
This is Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rarick, I believe, and I'm going to look back and see if I have a shaking yes or no, that we may be at about 6 weeks currently. 7 weeks currently. But like I said, we know that that's still too long, and we are working on that.
Senator Rarick.
One last question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. What other areas in construction do you do that same type of plan review, and what kind of a time frame are those industries looking at?
Go, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rarick, I am going to call up some support from our state building official, if that's okay.
Welcome to the
Good
committee.
afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Greg Metz. I am an assistant director at the Department of Labor and Industry and also the state building official. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, to answer your question, we review projects for compliance with the Minnesota State Building Code, which includes the building code itself, the mechanical code, the energy codes, accessibility, and plumbing. Those are our primary ones that we review. Typically, right now, because we've been in a code cycle, we are a little bit behind with our building codes and mechanical code plan reviews as well. So we're sitting at approximately 5 weeks for plan review of those.
Senator Rarick. Thank you. Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. And just a couple questions. I own an independent insurance agency, and I work with contractors and for insurance. And one of the things, when they're by themselves, they don't have employees, and they're doing a job, it seems like they're required to have a workman's comp policy that doesn't cover them, but it increases their expenses. Is that mandated?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Gruenhagen, I don't believe so. I think and I'm going to maybe turn to my assistant commissioner over workers' compensation, but I believe that workers' compensation coverage is required when an employer has employees. And I'm getting a head nod, yes.
Okay.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks for that response. I'll tell people that, my contractors that, when they come in and say, well, I got to have a workman's comp policy, even though I don't have employees. Do you ever do comparative analysis of our workman's comp rates in Minnesota compared to our 5 surrounding states? Do you ever do a comparative? Because I do get some outstate people towards, that know contractors out west, towards South Dakota. They just said, our workman comp rates are 2 or 3 times higher than if I did the same job in a neighboring state. Does that make sense?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Senator Gruenhagen. So we don't at the department do that, but there are entities that do. So the Workers' Compensation Research Institute does do a lot of that research and comparison. And I know that the workers' compensation industry in Minnesota is doing quite well, according to the last reports that have been put out. And that's all I know. If we have more in-depth questions on the type of the reports that are published by those other entities, I can probably get that information and provide it to you.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that response. It is a bone of contention with some of the small employers that I work with. Anyway, just over to construction codes and licensing. You know, one of the bit of information I was privy to in the last biennium was the cost of building an average home in Minnesota and the 10 surrounding states. And what you found was, and I'm sure it's worse now, and I still got a copy of it in my car, and I've referenced it so many times I've just about got it memorized, but in Minnesota to build the average home was $523,000, okay? It's probably more now. In Iowa, the same house, $370,000. In South Dakota, I think it was $350,000. North Dakota was $400,000. Wisconsin was over 100-some thousand cheaper. Michigan, Illinois, Nebraska, Kansas, they were all over $100-some thousand cheaper to build the same house than Minnesota. And I just, you know, my question is, when we pass, you know, one thing about government, we're good at piling on laws and regulations, okay? But we're not too good at evaluating the cost and the effectiveness. When these, you know, we passed a lot of additional cost onto construction in the last few years, when you're implementing these, which is your responsibility, do you ever give feedback to the legislature or to, as an agency head, that, you know, this requirement we're getting very little benefit from, but it's still increasing the cost of housing exponentially? And I think there's got to be a reason we're so out of balance compared to 10 surrounding states for building the same house, and it's having a very negative effect on new homeowners or people who would like to build a house who can't afford it anymore because of all the mandates that we have. So is there ever any evaluation in terms of cost benefit of the new laws or regulations that we pass on construction?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I think there are a lot of things that go into the cost of building a home that are probably outside the jurisdiction of the department, local regulations, local zoning, things like that. As far as code adoption within the department, what I would say is we take a lot of time and stakeholder input throughout that process to determine what the impact will be after a new code is adopted. So we utilize a process where we pull together technical advisory groups. Those technical advisory groups come together, they hear the model code, determine, you know, what may make sense in Minnesota, what may not make sense in Minnesota if we want to do an adjustment from those model codes. And part of that consideration can be cost. So we bring in stakeholders from all sides, the technical advisory groups, take testimony, meet with stakeholders, and then the technical advisory groups send forth recommendations to the Construction Code Advisory Council. The Construction Code Advisory Council then hears much of the same input in determining what recommendation they put forward on code adoption. So we have worked into our process lots of opportunity for that input and impact on code adoption before the codes are even adopted. So I would say we do consider that information, and it is brought throughout the process in the code adoption.
Senator Gruenhagen, go ahead.
Thanks for that response. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think we as a committee and just as legislature in general, we're just driving up I think the legislatures in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, and I could go on, care just about as much as their citizens as we do. But for some reason, we stick out like a sore thumb in terms of the cost increases, and I think a lot of that has to do with government. And I think somehow we need to evaluate that to bring that more in line with what especially young couples can actually afford, and here in the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner, thank you for the presentation. I really did like the examples. It was really fun. I just have a simple question, which is, where actually does the money for the Workforce Development Fund come from?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair and Senator Pappas, that fund is under the purview of DEED, but I am not well-versed in the source of the funding into the fund. We are appropriated the money, and the Workforce Development Fund pays for things like youth skills training, apprenticeship, things like that. But I can probably call someone up who maybe knows more a little bit about it, but that fund is under the purview of DEED.
All right, thank you.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, but first just a comment. And I was glad to see you talked about the Work Comp Advisory Council, and just how important that group really is. It's an equal number of employers and labor representatives working together to make sure that we have a work comp system that works well, that's fair. And we use that council very effectively during COVID to ensure that we had preemption for our first responders and our medical workers, that they didn't have to go through, say, some of the normal hoops that someone else who got COVID would have to, that it was presumed if they made the claim they got it at work, they had been working with COVID people who had been infected with COVID, that they would have a presumption it was work-related. And I think that gave a lot of comfort to the families of our first responders, both in the field, police, fire, EMT, as well as our medical workers. And I think it just highlights that we should not be doing work comp legislation without the buy-off on this advisory council. It's really that important. And so, Commissioner, I want to thank you for highlighting that and bringing it forward, because I think it's one of those hidden items that we don't always recognize the importance of it. The other question I had, and you didn't really touch on it in your presentation, but the governor's been coming out with recommendations for fraud, waste, and abuse. Last summer, your department was flagged on the frontline worker program as not having those proper controls in place. As you'll recall, because I remember you were part of the negotiations with Commissioner Robertson, the frontline worker pay was payments to people who had to show up to work during COVID that were classified as essential workers, and it was tied in with paying off the debt that we had to the federal government for the unemployment insurance program. We went from a $1.7 billion UI reserve down to a $1.5 billion debt that we owed the federal government. Maybe you could just touch on the OLA findings and what you're doing to address those.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair and Senator Pratt, thank you for that question. And first, I will start by saying we're Comp Advisory Council. I agree with your statements. It's been really a privilege to work with that group, and they've been very successful in passing some incredible work comp legislation over the past couple sessions as I've been able to work with them. So I just want to reiterate that. As to the frontline worker pay program, I did kind of expect that I would get some questions, so I do have some of my materials with me, and I'd be happy to talk about that program. I'll start by saying I work very closely with that program, and it was an honor to administer that program at the Department of Labor and Industry in conjunction with the Department of Revenue and DEED. I'll say it was a very successful, first-of-its-kind program that really efficiently delivered timely support to those frontline workers that really risk their lives and sacrifice their own personal safety to provide the services we all needed throughout the COVID pandemic. So as you mentioned, I was involved in some of the negotiation for what that program looked like. Really, I was there to provide that practical aspect of what could and could not be done as far as verification for certain aspects of the eligibility requirement. So during those negotiations, I know that the legislature was really fully informed of some of the trade-offs that needed to happen that really balanced the need for quickly getting payments to those workers who were deserving with the need to prevent payments to ineligible applicants. I think that we really did achieve that, and I just want to highlight a couple of the ways we did that. There were aspects of the program that were verifiable through sources of information we had in state government. Things like adjusted gross income, as filing showed with the Department of Revenue. Things like hours worked that were reported into the UI system at DEED. Things like that. So we were able to independently verify many aspects of the eligibility requirements. There were some eligibility requirements, however, that were not independently verifiable by state government. Things like needing to work in close proximity with people outside of the home, or the requirement that work be done in person versus remotely. And so fully understanding that in the conversations related to the legislation, the legislature recognized that some of those eligibility requirements were not independently verifiable by the state, and therefore passed, as we do with many things that we do in government, self-certification requirement for the applicant. So consistent with those parameters that were set forth in the legislation with the self-certification, knowing the timeline, for instance, we only received the funding and the recognition of this program for a year. The program did in fact rely on that self-certification for those things that were not independently verifiable. And as to the OLA report, they provided a number of different scenarios. And our reading of the report and in looking through what we know in administering the program, we believe that the projection scenario that was included in the Office of Legislative Auditor report, that 0.2% of payments to ineligible applicants is the most accurate and defensible scenario because it didn't rely on employer survey results alone in determining that an applicant was ineligible for payment. So I would say that that supports that this was a pretty incredibly successful program that was able to quickly turn around or those payments to workers who deserve those.
Thank you. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can you remind me, if I recall, we were expecting to pay out about $750 per applicant. How many applications did we get, and what did we end up paying out per worker?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Senator Pratt, this is a number that was burned into my brain, and now I am blanking, but I think it was slightly under $500 per recipient.
And
Senator Pratt?
Mr. Chair, it was one of those, it was an interesting negotiation because the Senate came with a number of fraud prevention measures that the department assured us were unnecessary. And I think what we're seeing in the OLA report and what we're seeing in the drop in the number of people or the amount that each recipient got was far less than what we intended. We wanted that to be a meaningful amount, and I'm not sure somewhere less than $500 was really what the legislation was intended to do. It's frustrating because as the governor's come out with these fraud prevention measures, we've been proposing these all along. And the fraud prevention measures that would have helped reduce the amount of fraud, because Mr. Chair, I spent 10 years in the financial services industry, specifically focused on fraud and fraud prevention. I can tell you it's always easier to prevent fraud than it is to find it and recoup it after the fact. Based on the department's recommendation, our fraud prevention measures failed on a party line vote. So it's while I'm glad to see the governor, finally address this issue, because it's been a problem in all of his agencies. It's a little bit frustrating that along the way we couldn't prevent some of these. So, Mr. Chair, just one last question for the commissioner. That the OLA report came out in June. Can you tell us what you've been doing and how much you've recouped in inappropriate payments?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair and Senator Pratt, yes, I can go into some of the actions we've taken since the OLA report was produced. I do want to touch a little bit on the allegations of fraud. When you look at the OLA report, it kind of has fraud, alleged fraud separated into a portion of the report. And I think that if you read that, you will see that it really does confirm the success of DLI's fraud prevention efforts, including by finding an incredibly small percentage of applications with a fraud indicator. We worked fraud prevention efforts into every aspect of this program, including, and thank you for this, in putting language into the bill that allowed us to refer individuals for payments to be recouped by the Department of Revenue. So in the 7 months that the program was in operation, DLI's fraud prevention protocols, and this was by identifying fraud indicators and applications, prevented payments to over 28,000 applicants that were determined to be fraudulent based on those fraud indicators. Our identity verification process that was built into the application prevented an additional 52,000 applications from being inappropriately paid. That identification resulted in over $36 million in estimated fraud prevention. And those were all fraud prevention measures that the Department of Labor and Industry, working with DEED and Revenue, worked directly into the program. During the 16-month audit, the OLA was able to identify only 140 applications with fraud indicators. Since the time that the audit was released, we have looked more in depth into those 140 applications that were identified, and determined whether or not those applications were in fact fraudulent. Some of them were not. We were able to verify that they were not fraudulent applications. And then we have been working with the BCA to refer any applications where we believe that they were submitted by a fraudulent actor claiming to be someone else. We're referring those for criminal action. We have also looked into every application that was flagged by the OLA as potentially not being eligible for payment. We looked into those and did follow-up, and all of the applications that we deemed to not be eligible were referred to the Department of Revenue for the recoup process to take place. I don't have the exact final number of people we referred for recoup, but again, it was a very small percentage of people that were identified in that audit that we, after doing further research, determined were ineligible for payments. All of those have been referred to the Department of Revenue for recoup.
Senator Pratt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Members, just as a reminder, the OLA report listed a couple of things. One, advising the legislature that we put into statute those very issues that we should have, and reminding us that, in fact, a number of these applications were approved with fraud indicators on them where they weren't investigated thoroughly. My guess is, and the concern that we had was that we would be paying out these funds to people who maybe didn't live in Minnesota but had, worked a few hours here or and this was really intended to be a benefit for Minnesota residents. I'd like to continue to talk to the Commissioner about this since this is a fairly new report, and I didn't expect to be back on the Labor Committee. But Mr. Chair, I think this is something that as we go forward, whether it's in jobs, whether it's in labor, whether it's in finance, that we look at these issues to make sure that we have the proper financial controls, the proper processes in place to safeguard the taxpayers' money in this case. This was a $500 million program that ended up not being as, I think, substantial as we had hoped to individual people who were, quite honestly, while everybody else was home trying to stay well, they were out in the field providing police services, medical services, keeping grocery stores open along the way. And I think they deserve better than what we did. That's just my commentary on it, and I'm sure the Commissioner will disagree with me. But I hope that we as a legislature will do a much, much better job, and I'm hoping that we finally have a governor that will support us in that effort. Thank you.
Wiesenberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I just had a question or a statement about plumbing when we were talking about the plumbing, going back to that, because we are actually, my wife is opening a business, and that's something we're waiting on. So the 7-week statement, I kind of raised my eyebrows. I'm not like trying to say gotcha, but so I talked to our contractor, and they're still being told 12 to 14 weeks. They submitted a job back in July, and it just got approved this week. So I guess maybe if we can come back on Thursday and see if the 7-week timeline is actually where we're at, or if maybe that's not quite the actual information. So I guess that's just my statement. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can absolutely check on that, but I am pretty confident in speaking with the Assistant Director that we're probably at about a 7-week turnaround right now in plumbing plan review, but I can follow up with you.
Members, any other question? Senator Umar Verbatim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since we were just discussing fraud, I just wanted to bring up a piece that I'm concerned about in terms of worker misclassification fraud or employer misclassification fraud. And I know that there was also an OLA report on that, which the estimate was potentially 1 in 5 folks being misclassified. I know it can be difficult to get an estimate, but is there anything you could say, Commissioner, about like where this fraud is impacting us? There's the lost wages, of course, for workers, but I'm also thinking about the unemployment trust fund, Department of Revenue, tax collection, workers' compensation, and just any other, government programs where we would be depending on that funding to be coming in. And then if it's difficult for you to come up with some of those estimates, I know we talk about this on the task force, just if there's any ways that you think we could be studying that to get a better estimate of how much that fraud is costing the taxpayers. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair and Senator, yes, so that is something that I spent a lot of time talking about last legislative session with you, as we worked to pass a bill that addressed some of the deficiencies that we identified at the Department of Labor and Industry in enforcing misclassification against those employers who were misclassifying their employees. But the effects are pretty broad-ranging. So we have there can be an effect tax-wise when employers are not treating employees as employees and rather treating them as independent contractors. There can be lost revenue for the state of Minnesota in employment taxes. There can be lost money into the UI account for unemployment insurance taxes. There can also be employees may not be realizing the benefits in wages and other workplace benefits that they're entitled to as an employee in the state of Minnesota. And there's also the impact on workers' compensation insurance. If an employer is not carrying insurance because they're not treating any of their employees as employees, then as I talked about earlier, the obligation ends up being with the Special Compensation Fund, which is funded through assessments on work comp insurers and self-insured employers. So there are lots of different aspects to how misclassification fraud can impact the state and the employees that are being misclassified. Sorry, I know I missed one part of your question, which was how do we identify the scope of the impact of misclassification? That is one thing that the Office of Legislative Auditor in their report said is very hard. In the legislation that passed last session, the partnership was formed amongst Department of Revenue, DEED, Department of Labor and Industry, and the Department of Commerce, as well as the Attorney General's Office. One of the tasks that the partnership has been given is to develop a way that we can provide better estimates of misclassification that's happening, as well as its impact on the state. So more to come on that front. We're still working through what data the departments collect and how we can use that to provide better estimates on the impact of misclassification fraud.
Thank you. Senator Payton, you're done? Okay. Senator Kupek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. Just want to, because every time I hear anything border related, I always get my hackles always go up. So I did a quick Google search on workers' compensation. We're per hour, we're lower than Wisconsin. We're 1 cent higher than Iowa, and we're 3 cents higher than South Dakota. North Dakota, my neighbor to the west, does have the lowest worker compensation rates in the country, but I do seem to remember that their fund has also run short at times. So that may be part of it. And just also for my own district, Moorhead has had more building permits for single-family homes this year than Fargo or West Fargo. So we are outpacing them. So there's always like to little district toot there. But then I want to change topics because actually I'd like to talk about the apprenticeship programs, because I know traditionally we've thought about, mostly I think when you think of those, you think of them as trade programs. And I'm curious, we've expanded to teachers. Has there been any look at expanding those, to other fields where I know we have a critical shortage. I think there is a nursing one as well, but I'm also thinking, maybe even into like the law enforcement realm or places like that where we're kind of critical fields that we are also short of workers.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair and Senator, yes, absolutely. We've actually seen more and more attention being placed on registered apprenticeship. I like to say it is the gold standard of workforce development programs because of the success that we've seen in apprentices being able to earn family-sustaining wages right out the gate while removing some of those barriers for people to participate in the programs. But we have seen it grown in healthcare, IT. It's prevalent in manufacturing as well. But now we've seen programs in childcare. We have a statewide registered childcare apprenticeship program that's registered with the department, and teachers. So those are just some of the areas, but we are seeing the interest and growth in registered apprenticeship programs in Minnesota.
Senator Kupek. Members, any other questions? Any other questions? No? Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Bliesenbach. We appreciate you coming in, giving your presentation, and taking a lot of questions. So thank you. I'm sure we'll get to see you multiple times through the year. And to your team, too, thank you for all that came. Appreciate the expertise you have in your field. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there being no more further business before the committee, the meeting is adjourned.